From KVUE News in Austin, you're watching Texas This Week with Ashley Goudeau.
Good Sunday morning. It has been quite a week in the world of Texas politics. Fights under the dome, major resignations, and the ballooning crisis at the border. That's where we'll start with the three things you need to know in Texas politics. The number of migrants crossing the Texas-Mexico border is surging. The U.S. is bracing for the largest wave of migrants in the last 20 years. ABC News reports unaccompanied migrant children make up more than 50% of the people in Border Patrol custody, and thousands of them will temporarily stay in Texas. Wednesday, Governor Greg Abbott visited the K. Bailey Hutchison Convention Center in Dallas. Thousands of teenage boys will stay there. Abbott said President Joe Biden's policies are enticing children to make the dangerous journey across the border, which is creating a crisis in Texas. The Public Utility Commission of Texas, the agency charged with overseeing the state's power grid, has no leadership. The sole commissioner, Arthur D'Andrea, resigned this week at the request of Governor Greg Abbott. The move came hours after Texas Monthly released this article detailing a conversation D'Andrea had with investors who profited from the skyrocketing price of energy in last month's winter storm, a price that was set by the PUC and kept at the highest level even after the worst of the storm had passed. On the call, D'Andrea reportedly assured investors he would throw his weight behind not retroactively repricing. And that repricing is creating a major rift between the leaders of the Texas House and Senate. On Monday, the Senate suspended numerous rules to file, vote out of committee, and then approve Senate Bill 2142 with bipartisan support. It orders the PUC and ERCOT to reverse the billions of dollars in charges. The members were encouraged, Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick saying this is the right thing to do, but the high didn't last long. Speaker of the House Dade Phelan didn't give the bill a warm reception and instead said repricing would be, quote, extraordinary government intervention into the free market, end quote. Patrick isn't letting it go that easy, though. He's calling on Governor Abbott to step in and use executive power. We are about halfway through the legislative session, so things really picked up this week. The waiting period to take votes in the chambers is over and committee hearings went into overdrive. Governor Greg Abbott started the week by throwing his support behind a group of bills that he says will increase election integrity. But those bills are getting a lot of pushback. Grace Chimene, president of the League of Women Voters Texas, joined me to talk about why that is. For our viewers who may not be familiar with the organization, tell us what exactly is the League of Women Voters.
The League of Women Voters. We are a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization, the political organization that has been around for 100 years. We were formed when women first got the right to vote. So it's been 101 years now. And we are still active at the Texas Capitol. What we are mostly well known for is our voters guide and encouraging everybody and helping people with getting out the vote and understanding our voting laws.
You know, when we look at what happened during 2020 in the election of 2020, it, probably was one of the most controversial elections in recent history, but also one of the most scrutinized. You had so many court hearings on what could and could not be done. You had so many votes counted and recounted. Some say it was one of the most transparent elections that we've seen in recent history, but it has sparked conversation about voter and election integrity. When you hear that term, what are your thoughts in context of the 2020 election?
When I hear that term, I think, I wish they were talking about, woohoo, we did a great job, because the Secretary of State of Texas, during their interview at the Capitol, said, we did a fantastic job. They had very few problems. Everything went well. Most of the voters were very satisfied with how they were able to vote and cast their ballot. It turned out to be a fantastic election. We had more people voting than ever before.
And yet, during his State of the State address, Governor Greg Abbott made election integrity one of his emergency items. This is something he wants lawmakers to pass a whole slew of bills on. What are your thoughts about focusing on election integrity? Do you see first, a problem with Texas elections?
I do not see that problem, and I know where he's coming from, but it doesn't seem like election integrity to me. It seems like voter suppression. The bills are, there are 400 voting and election bills that we are following, and I'm sure there is even more than that. Many of the bills are about suppressing the vote. They're about limiting when and how you're able to vote. They're about restricting your access to the polling place to a limited number of hours. It's everything. Just think, instead of voter integrity, think, oh, is that really restricting somebody's right to vote? Is it making it harder to vote? Is it limiting access to the polling place? Because that's what most of these bills are about. I don't even want to use the word that he is using because I think it is wrong. I think you can't have election integrity without looking at that bill and saying, is that really limiting access to fair and free elections here in Texas?
So I really want to hone in on a few of the bills that the governor highlighted. He had a news conference earlier this week, and he talked about that there were some processes in counties across Texas where he believed that elected officials encouraged voter fraud through abuse of mail-in ballots and through drive-through voting. So we're going to talk about that, but first let's talk about this voter fraud. Is this something that we're seeing widespread cases of across the state of Texas?
No, absolutely not. And so that is another word that is thrown around easily. When somebody says that word, they really mean, oh, they made it easier to vote. They allowed people to have a application to vote by mail sent to them. Well, people didn't have printers. People didn't have a way to get around because transportation was decreased. Libraries were closed. There was no place to go get printing done. And so the Harris County election folks sent a copy of the vote by mail application. That sounds like a good thing to me. It helps voters. Voters who didn't need it didn't fill it out. They just threw it away. And that is a good thing. That is not what the governor is saying it is.
We saw a lot of people during this pandemic use drive-through voting. This was something new that came out in certain Texas counties where you just kind of drove to your polling location and they brought it out to you. You didn't have to get out of your car in the pandemic. But that is something that the governor is not a fan of.
Isn't that interesting? Because you would think that all politicians would support easy and fair access to the voting place. And if it allows voters to feel more comfortable to drive in their car up, they're following the same exact process to vote as they would if they got out of the car and walked inside to the polling place. The same process, even the poll watchers were allowed to be there to watch the process to make sure everything was fair at the polling site. The only difference was they were in their car, they were safe. This was a pandemic. It was a very scary time. People didn't want to be around each other and be exposed to COVID.
Yeah. I would imagine that of the 400 plus bills you all are watching, some of them are bills that you guys are backing that you think are good ideas that would help expand voter access. Tell us about some of them.
Yes, there are some good ones. We like it when, say, curbside voting, so that when voters who have disability want a curbside vote, we would love for there to be a sign put up to make the process easier for curbside voting. So we love that bill. We also like part of some of these other bills, ones that allow you to track your vote by mail ballot. So you can see where your application is and where your ballot is and when it arrives at the county election office. Those are good things. Those are things that help voter integrity. They help voters know where their ballot is so that they know their votes are counted. Those are the type of bills that we're looking forward to passing at the Capitol.
And now the last word. Texas is making great strides in its efforts to vaccinate people against COVID-19. A quarter of all eligible Texans have gotten at least one shot. And across the Lone Star State, counties are ramping up their efforts, vaccinating thousands of people a day. And yet, in Austin, a city whose leaders brag about being the tech capital of Texas, people in groups 1A and 1B, the first allowed to get a shot, still aren't vaccinated. Not for a lack of want or trying, but because of a system that simply does not work. And I'm not talking about the technical difficulties that happened this week, though I'll say having people wait in line for 6 hours, desperately trying to get an appointment before you finally let them know your system is broken is unacceptable. But the way Austin Public Health has handled this distribution has long been botched. So many of you have reached out to me personally, to the station, expressing your frustration with not being able to make an appointment. And when you do, waiting in a line for hours to try to get your shot, sometimes with nowhere to sit or even a restroom to use. Meanwhile, other counties in Texas are practically begging people to come in and get shots. Their systems are simple and they work. You register online or over the phone, then you're contacted when it's time to make your appointment. And sometimes you can get in on the same day. There's no weekly free-for-all where a portal opens at a different time on certain days and you hope your randomly assigned position in line will garner you a slot. Seriously, who thought this was the best way to do this? And more, why are you still doing it this way? If people are emailing us about the problems, I know they're emailing city and county leaders. You need to act. Take a page from a neighboring county's book. Now, admitting the system you put in place is broken and finding a fix will take more work and it may be inconvenient. But what's far worse is leaving the elderly in our community vulnerable to this deadly virus because you're sticking with a system that is flawed. That's the last word, and this has been Texas This Week.